This episode is sponsored by Conflict of Nations, a free online player versus player strategy game where you choose a real country to lead during World War III. Build your military using a wide option of platforms and weapons, tanks, jets, nuclear submarines, and fight up to 128 other players in real time. Choose your own strategy, declare war or forge alliances, and engage in epic battles to conquer the world. You can play with the same account on both PC and mobile. Click on the link in the description for an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold bars and 1 month of the Premium Security Council subscription for free. Offer only available for 30 days, so don't wait. 1979 was a busy year for the USS Nimitz, the U.S. Navy's second nuclear-powered aircraft carrier and the first in the Nimitz class. The ship was the setting for the movie The Final Countdown, a sci-fi feature about what might happen if F-14 Tomcats were introduced during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And during the long deployment that followed that filming, Nimitz was stationed in the Persian Gulf and used as the launching pad for the Marine Corps helicopters that participated in the ill-fated attempt to rescue the hostages at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. In the spring of 1981, Nimitz was preparing for another deployment, one that would be as eventful as the previous ones had been, highlighted by the shoot-down of 2 Libyan Su-22s by VF-41 Tomcats in the Gulf of Sidra in August, only 2 weeks after in-chopping the 6th Fleet Area of Responsibility in the Mediterranean. But at 11:47 p.m. on May 26, 1981, the Nimitz would face another challenge, one that fuels the nightmares of naval aviators and sailors who work on flight decks. The Nimitz was conducting cyclic flight operations off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida with the squadrons of Carrier Air Wing 8. The ship was just over a month from deploying and the pressure was on. Among the CAG-8 squadrons was Detachment Yankee from Marine Corps EA-6B Prowler Squadron VMAQ-2, the Playboys. Marine Corps fixed-wing jet squadrons are a routine part of U.S. Navy Carrier Air Wings. In fact, 3 of my 5 extended deployments included Marine Corps squadrons in the Air Wing. An Intruder Squadron VMA All-Weather 533 Hawks on Kennedy, a Prowler Squadron VMA-Q3 Moondogs, and a Legacy Hornet Squadron VMFA 251 Thunderbolts on America, and then the T-Bolts again on my final cruise aboard Washington. The Playboys jet on the final event of the flying day on May 26 was Easy 610, Easy being VMAQ-2's tactical call sign, piloted by a brand new squadron pilot, First Lieutenant Steve White. In the Prowler with First Lieutenant White were 2 other junior Marine Corps electronic countermeasure officers, also known as ECMOs for short, Captain Elwood Armstrong and First Lieutenant Larry Cragen. White had been fighting a head cold that threatened to keep him off the flight schedule. The day before, he'd paid the Air Wing flight surgeon a visit, and he was given some brompheniramine, a decongestant, and told not to fly until he could Valsalva, which means that the congestion in his sinuses was low enough that he could clear an ear blockage by plugging his nose and blowing. If an aviator can't clear the blockage, changes in atmospheric pressure at various altitudes can cause sinuses to rupture, which will remove that person from a flying status permanently. When White woke up on the 26th, he still couldn't Valsalva, but he wanted to prove as the new guy he was a hacker. He upped the dosage of the cold medicine the flight surgeon had given him, and as the day wore on, he felt a little better, well enough to participate in the flight. First Lieutenant White was having trouble getting the Prowler back aboard, what carrier aviators refer to as a night in the barrel. He'd made several unsuccessful attempts to land and either boltered, the term for missing the 4 wires with the tailhook, or was waved off by the LSOs because the jet was out of safe approach parameters. Like the Tomcat, the EA-6B wasn't a fly-by-wire jet. Prowler pilot workload was very high. And the Prowler was a big jet with a wingtip-to-wingtip span of 53 feet. The landing area of a Nimitz-class carrier is only 120 feet wide, which gave EA-6B pilots a margin of error of just over 33 feet of horizontal deviations to either side of centerline when landing. On his next pass, First Lieutenant White was at bingo fuel, which meant if he didn't get aboard, he'd have to divert to Cecil Field, a naval air station he wasn't familiar with. And as the new guy, he certainly wanted to avoid the attention from his squadron mates, not to mention the higher-ups that would come with diverting. At 3/4 of a mile, Easy 610 called the ball. The LSO told him he was too high. Navy carrier pilots are trained to keep their scans going, meatball, lineup, angle of attack, but First Lieutenant White most likely was fixated on moving the ball to the center of the lens, and as a result, he didn't notice that the Prowler was drifting right of centerline. The controlling LSO saw that he was drifting dangerously right and still too high, but instead of giving him a come left call to correct the lineup, he told him to wave off. The proper response at that point would have been for First Lieutenant White to advance the throttle to full military power, but for some reason he didn't. The Prowler touched down past the arresting wires, well right of centerline with a right drift. The jet hit the tail of an SH-3 helicopter, 3 A-7s, and a tow tractor parked along the foul line before slamming into 3 F-14 Tomcats parked along catapult number 2 and coming to rest in a huge fireball along the port side. The 3 Marines in the Prowler were killed instantly. From his chair on the left side of the bridge, the carrier's commanding officer ordered Nimitz to go to general quarters. The Tomcats, each configured with 1 AIM-7F Sparrow missile, 1 AIM-9 Lima Sidewinder missile, 1 AIM-54 Phoenix missile, and 500 rounds of 20mm bullets, had just been refueled, and the JP-5 from their external tanks ignited around the base of Cat-2, and that fire grew and threatened to spread across the flight deck. Fortunately, the firefighting team did their job well, and the fire was first contained on the bow, and then, about a half hour after it started, put out altogether. The crew was secured from general quarters and a cleanup team was ordered to begin their effort, but as the sailors got near the damaged jets along Cat-2, one of the Sparrow missiles that had fallen to the flight deck exploded, killing 2 of the sailors and injuring 7 others. The explosion started another fire, which cooked off 2 Sparrows and 1 Sidewinder along with some rounds of 20mm ammunition. When the second fire was finally extinguished, 11 sailors lay dead and another 39 were injured, many of them severely enough that they had to be airlifted to shore hospitals. In addition to the Prowler, another 3 aircraft on the flight deck were completely destroyed and another 9 were damaged. In all, the total was about $100 million worth of damage. The subsequent investigation concluded not only that the mishap was caused by the Prowler landing well right of centerline, but also that an autopsy on First Lieutenant White revealed that he had 11 times the recommended dosage of brompheniramine in his system, and that, quote, may have degraded the mental and physical skills required for night landings, end quote. As a result, aviation commanding officers across the fleet were directed to remove the stigma of their aviators taking themselves off the flight schedule when illness demands it. They were told to set the tone that doing other than that didn't make the aviators hackers, it made them dangerous. And then the result of the investigation took a dramatic turn when, in addition to the mishap pilot's high level of decongestant in his system, it was also revealed that the autopsies on 6 of the deceased members of the crew killed in the explosions around Cat-2 showed evidence of marijuana usage. During a hearing on Capitol Hill, New York Representative Joseph Addabbo accused the Navy of ignoring the degree to which drug use may have contributed to the crash and loss of life aboard Nimitz on that tragic night. A Navy biochemist, an active duty lieutenant commander, testified that of the 6 that had some chemical evidence of marijuana use, 3 had high levels, 75 nanograms per milliliter of blood, that indicated recent or heavy use, possibly within 6 hours. Secretary of the Navy John Lehman, himself a reserve A-6 intruder bombardier navigator, pushed back, stating emphatically that marijuana use by flight deck personnel had had no bearing on the mishap and that it had been solely due to pilot error. When asked whether the LSO actions were a contributing factor, Lehman said yes, and then when asked whether the LSO had been tested for drug use, Lehman had to admit he had not been tested, and he modified his first answer by stating that ultimately it's up to the pilot to safely land his jet. The argument went back and forth between the Pentagon and Congressman Addabbo for months until the situation landed on the desk of President Ronald Reagan. The president, whose wife, First Lady Nancy Reagan, famously championed a Just Say No Anti-Drug campaign, was shocked at what the sailor autopsies revealed and convinced that drug use was rampant throughout the military and, regardless of what his Navy secretary was telling him about whether or not it contributed to the Prowler crash on Nimitz, he was concerned that marijuana use by service members was a threat to national security and readiness. Reagan summoned his Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger and ordered him to do something about it. The result was the U.S. military's drug screening program that still exists to this day. During part of my tour in my first fighter squadron, I had the collateral duty of legal officer, which gave me in-depth knowledge of the details of the drug screening program and first-hand experience in the effort required to carry it out. The Navy JAG's main concern was that the program not be used by commands as a targeted weapon against individual personnel, so drug screening had to either be command-wide or random, which generally meant the commanding officer would pick a number, and anyone with that number as the last digit of their social security number would have to submit a urine sample in the presence of the command urinalysis coordinator. Once the sample was obtained in a plastic cup, there was a strict chain of custody protocol that had to be followed to protect the integrity of the program. A few weeks after each screening, the commanding officer would get a report from the lab, and occasionally one of the sailors in the squadron would pop positive. That sailor would be given the option by me as the legal officer to either choose captain's mast, non-judicial punishment, or a court-martial, and generally they would choose captain's mast because a court-martial can result in imprisonment where captain's mast cannot. So at mast, the sailor was offered an opportunity by the skipper to explain the circumstances that resulted in THC in his urine, and in most cases, absent credible mitigating circumstances and a stellar service record, that sailor would be administratively separated from the Navy with an other than honorable discharge. I will say the U.S. Navy's drug screening program was both an administrative burden on the command, but it was also effective in significantly reducing, if not totally eliminating, casual drug use by members of the squadron. Another outcome of the Prowler mishap investigation was an effort by ordnance commands to make what they called insensitive munitions that wouldn't cook off in the event of a shipboard fire. The results of that effort, which were rapidly instituted, have made operations at sea much safer. Once again, thanks to the sponsor of this episode, Conflict of Nations, a free online player versus player modern global warfare strategy game that lets you engage in epic battles and take over the world. Click on the link in the description for an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold bars, and 1 month of the Premium Security Council subscription for free. Offer is only available for 30 days, so don't wait. All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything going forward. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider using the super thanks, the heart icon below, or become a patron at patreon.com/WardCarroll. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.